Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Skill-Capped and LoL Esports collaboration. With Season 14 well underway, as we head into MSI, we wanted to take a look at how the massive changes that went through affected pro play. We're here to discuss how the meta changed, how some win conditions stayed the same, and some of the ways that teams are adapting to the new map and objectives that were added this season. We'll be covering the 3 biggest changes to the map, starting with everyone's favorite cuties you all love, the Void Grubs, which were Season 14's new exciting objective that came in and completely shook up the pro meta game. For about a month at most. At the start of the season, some regions were fighting to the death over this objective regularly. These days though, chaotic fights over the Grubs are far less common, and teams instead look to mostly secure them when they happen to be easy and convenient to take. So, how did Grubs go from a hotly contested objective to an afterthought in most pro teams' eyes despite them going through basically 0 changes? Unfortunately, the culprit to them being valued so highly in the first place is everyone's favorite pastime, ranked solo queue. You see, early into a season, most of a pro player's experience of playing on the new map came from spamming a ton of solo queue games. As we're sure you all know, Void Grubs and solo queue are very useful. Due to the chaotic nature of solo queue, getting Grubs lets you capitalize very hard on enemy mistakes. If someone happens to randomly die or leave their lane, you can deal massive damage to their tower while it's undefended. And if you get to 6 stacks of Grubs, you guys already know how quickly you can group up and destroy towers with all the mites your team spawns. But that's not actually super relevant in professional play. There's far fewer mistakes to punish. Players don't randomly die as often, and they don't abandon their lanes for 0 reason. As a result, it's very rare that you get to hit a tower for free in competitive, unless you've already wiped the enemy team. So, Void Grubs revealed themselves to be a bit of a win more objective in coordinated environments. If you're already winning, then you get to push towers a bit faster. But if you're even in the game or losing, then they can sometimes give no meaningful advantage. Now, don't get us wrong, getting 5 or 6 stacks of the Grub buff is still fairly useful in pro play, but that brings us to their biggest flaw. If you didn't know, most of the experience that junglers get from killing Grubs comes from the first one they kill thanks to their jungle pet. Not only that, but most of the time spent killing all 3 comes from trying to finish off the second and third ones as they heal up. Basically, the game highly rewards you for taking a single Grub, and we see plenty of junglers take advantage of this. They'll path through the area, secure 1 or 2, and then leave. This way, they can deny 5 or 6 stacks while not spending forever on the camp. Here's what we're getting at. The Grubs are not that important to winning pro games, and it's very easy to deny 6 stacks due to the experience mechanic. So, how did teams adapt to this? Well, let's take a look at the LPL, the most aggressive region in the world, who are placing way more priority on simply diving bot lane at timings where one would normally try to take the Grubs. Let's take a look at this masterclass example of top esports punishing a jungler for even daring to look at the objective. At first glance, Viego is following some basic fundamentals. He's clearing vision for his top laner while they're building a slow push. This can allow Renekton to potentially crash a wave at Rumble's tower and sync up with Viego to take the Grubs. That is normally a simple but solid game plan, but top esports has knowledge that this is potentially happening. So while Xin Zhao is mid, he could help his Karma get pressure, and then they could move together to try and contest the Grubs. That's not what they do at all. They say, okay, have fun doing those. Everyone on top esports is immediately on the same page. Draven and Nautilus are building a big slow push, so Xin and Karma abandon the Grubs and simply rotate into the enemy's jungle to flank bot lane. Because they know that the enemy Viego is on the other side of the map on Grubs, they can fully commit to the dive. And this lane is completely over, but hey, the enemy team does 24 more damage per second to towers. That will surely be worth it later, right? These 80 carry oriented type of trades for the Grubs are becoming more and more popular, especially in the LPL. For example, look at how LNG's Graves and Nautilus walk very aggressively in full vision towards the Grubs. This is to bait their opponents into responding to the rotation. They want to waste their time while Varus goes bottom. After Maokai teleports in and commits thinking that they're going to fight for Grubs, LNG simply disengages. They take 1 Grub, getting a lot of experience for Graves and denying 6 stacks from ever being taken. This was a super well executed bait. All the while, this lets them prioritize solo farm for their Varus down in bot lane. Likewise, they then make it a living nightmare for Maokai to ever get back to bot lane to farm. This gives Varus a massive lead by smartly using the Grubs as bait. We'll see a similar pattern here. Nidalee is in the area right as Grubs spawn, and she could not care less. While the enemy Lee Sin begins doing them, she instead books it down to bot lane. Typically, you'd have to be afraid of a counter gank here, but Nidalee is using the Grub spawn as a timing window to go for a free gank. Punishing the 5-minute Grub spawn with a bot lane play is something the LPL loves to do. It's a guaranteed way of knowing where a jungler would be on the map, allowing you to make a play without fear of being countered. And it turns out that in competitive games, having a Fed AD carry continues to be one of the best and most consistent ways of winning a game of League of Legends. Go figure. As a result, people have slowly started catching on and being a bit more careful about when they start Grubs. We'll even see junglers path through the area, ignoring the objective out of fear of being punished by starting them. Nowadays, Grubs are far less prioritized than early into the season in pro play. Junglers these days tend to take them when their teammates aren't in much risk and when it's convenient and easy to do. They're a nice objective, but players realize they're not worth leaving your teammates undefended to secure them. Now, all of these reasons are precisely why the Grubs are being buffed prior to MSI. While they are a powerful objective in solo queue, pro players realize that their value in competitive isn't that consistent, so changes to incentivize taking them needed to be made. For starters, their initial spawn timer is going from 5 to 6 minutes. Teams are very often just trading Dragon for Grubs in the early game because they both spawn at the same time. By desyncing their timers, this should make it more likely that fights happen around these objectives more often instead of just handshaking one for the other. On top of that, you will now get one Voidmite at 4 Grub stacks instead of 5. Like we said, taking one Grub each time they spawned was way too effective. This change is simply to make it more rewarding to take 2 of the Grubs on each rotation. We're excited to see how teams adapt to these changes coming into MSI. And while the Grubs didn't have the meta-changing impact we might have hoped for just yet, fights around Dragon certainly got a little spicier. The new Dragon landscape completely changed how Dragon fights not only play out, but also where they occur as well. If you've listened to the cast of a pro game, or even just watch educational guides, you'll have surely heard by now how important it is to be at objectives early to establish vision control. The idea is to force your opponents to face check into you if they want to contest an objective. This gives your team the upper hand for landing skill shots, ambushes, flanks, and so on. But the bot side river walls changed so much that this is actually far less significant around Dragon these days. Let's compare what the area looks like now to what it used to be. It's a bit jarring looking back on it, but these entrances used to be so much more narrow. It's hard to believe that they were that suffocating to enter less than a year ago. The reason getting early vision control was so important before was that it made it super frustrating for your opponents to enter the pit to contest if you'd gotten there beforehand. In just one series between T1 and JDG, you can see how many different fights are happening in these small choke points because one team is trying to get in to contest Dragon. These days, it's much easier to phase check through one of these entrances, allowing the team that gets there second a bit easier access to actually try and fight over the Dragon. The entrance from the lane or the topside ramp are both so wide that it's pretty hard to deny a team from entering the river. But that brings us to the second biggest change around the area, this wall between the river and the jungle. Because fights are happening on the choke points a bit less, the actual engagement is happening near the Drake itself more often than before. On the previous map, fights that happened next to Drake had this passageway to play around as well. This allowed players to posture a little to the side, away from their teammates, so they wouldn't clump as much. On the new map, that passageway isn't there. So if you're directly contesting the Dragon, then you'll begin to notice just how often teams are forced to clump along this wall. The best teams and players in all the leagues around the world are taking notice of this, and big playmakers are using this to their advantage. Let's take a look at this perfectly played Dragon sequence by Loud, so you can see exactly what we're talking about. As they camp a brush around the wall, the enemy team avoids them and goes all the way around to enter the river. Notice what Loud does though. They don't try to cut them off at all. They simply hold their ground and continue to play around this section of the river, baiting them to come and fight. The reason why will become clear immediately once both teams are in position. So, which team would you rather be? The one standing here with all the open space and a brush to play with as well, or the team clumped up around the wall, taking the Drake? It's a no-brainer, right? Now the enemy Rel feels pressured to engage before they tank Dragon for too long. But because Loud has so much space to play with, well, the engage didn't go so well. Here's where Loud's plan really comes together. That entire time, their top laner Robo was flanking them. Now the enemy team has nowhere to go. They're all stuck along this wall, hugging each other for safety. They desperately try to flash away, but the second Robo transforms, he follows them over and catches 3 of them with a massive ultimate, instantly finishing off the fight and winning the game. Let's take a look at another example, this time from the LCS. NRG get a great pick onto 100 Thieves Sniper in the side lane before Dragon. Normally, this would signal a free objective for them with a 5v4 advantage, but 100 Thieves aren't conceding it. They know they might actually be favored in this fight. Let's break down why as both teams start squaring off around the Dragon pit. As you can see, the natural clumps around the pit are starting to happen. However, NRG's best teamfighting ultimate around clump targets is actually down. They had to use their GP ultimate to secure their earlier pick. On the other hand, 100 Thieves have Bygar and Seraphine, and both of these champions are absurdly OP when targets clump around choke points. Knowing this, they play super patiently with their spells, waiting for an opportunity to present itself. Meanwhile, besides Ahri, NRG don't have any way to cleanly engage on them. Eventually, Senna lands a W and it roots 3 targets because there's not a lot of space to work with here. Finally, the 100 Thieves pull the trigger and use Seraphine ult to engage off of it. Meanwhile, Veigar drops his cage and no one on NRG can play the game anymore. 100 Thieves knew that this narrow corridor between the dragon and the river wall was perfect for their team comp to fight in, and they could easily contest despite being down a player. Just like that, they instantly win the fight and are now able to proceed to Baron afterwards to win the game. From what we're seeing, it seems like the teams that truly understand how the Dragon Dance changed on the new map are the ones that are coming out on top more often, positioning properly around the new choke points this wall is creating and saving big teamfight ultimates for those crucial moments when players clump up is going to be the deciding factor for many dragon fights going forward. Now, some of you may be a little disappointed that securing Dragon is now a little less about vision control since players can more easily walk in. Instead, Dragons are a bit more about the actual team fighting. For those of you who pride yourselves on macro and vision set up to carry games, do you just have to accept that your skills lost value on the new map? Not really. At Skillcapped, our goal is to take what pro players do and help translate it so you can use that knowledge in your own solo queue games. We want you to take everything you know about vision control and move it up just a little bit to this intersection right here. This area might be the literal most important spot on the map moving forward, and if you want to consistently carry games, you need to learn why pros value it so much. Most players know by now just how important it is to have control over pushing mid lane. Being the ones pushing the wave into your opponents gives you priority. You can move first to objectives, rotate to other lanes, force vision advantages, etc. This hasn't changed on the new map, but it is far more dominant than it used to be with the changes to the walls around this area. First, there was this big separation between mid and the brush near the wolf camp. This brush is important to control because it puts pressure on your opponents in mid. One of your teammates pushes, and the other makes it very hard for anyone to walk forward in mid, since there's the threat of engage coming from that brush. It may not seem like a lot, but on the previous map, there was like a 2 or 3 second separation between the players in mid and the one controlling the jungle. This might give your opponents an angle to potentially contest either area while you were a bit split. Nowadays, this path next to the tower makes that a non-issue. Player pushing mid is right next to the jungle. They can push and protect vision at the same time. Not only that, but this blue buff wall also made it a bit difficult for carries to rotate to fights. For example, you would always have your AD carry or mid being the ones pushing and the other players in the jungle, but if a fight broke out around here, it'd have no easy way to join it. But there is another pathway behind the blue buff that makes it so much easier to rotate to random fights for the carry who was stuck pushing in mid lane. Let's take a look at some examples so you can see just how teams are using the quick rotations enabled by this intersection to snowball games. Here we have JDG coming back out on the map and they're about to set up control in this area. First we have Ruler push out mid and then he rotates to join his team contesting vision around the blue buff. While there, you can tell where the incoming wave is based on your own wave. Thanks to how easy rotations are in this new jungle, Ruler can simply cut back through here and immediately get back to mid to catch the wave right as it's leaving the enemy tower. The enemy team, EDG, tries to use this brief window to desperately engage on the rest of JDG in the jungle. On the old map, Ruler would have to go one of the 2 long ways around to rejoin his team, or he'd maybe have to look for a flank to join the fight quickly, which is obviously not what an ADC would want to do. But now it's very easy to be on the mid lane wave and be in range to help out your team thanks to the convenient terrain changes in Season 14. He quickly rejoins his teammates, and once he gets there, JDG turns the fight around, and after winning this, they can close the game out easily. This is what we want you to learn from pro play. Stop placing your vision directly on the objectives. If you've taken the mid lane tower and you want to secure Dragon, place your vision in this area of the jungle instead. Your team's control over the mid lane wave and their blue side jungle will likely suffocate them, getting you a free objective. And if you're on the red side, you can do the same when you're trying to take Baron. All of the best teams in the world are aware and becoming super disciplined about controlling this space before an objective. Let's take a look at how Gen G does it. Dragon is spawning in less than a minute, and we see Pays in mid lane pushing in the wave. After doing so, he then walks into the jungle to hover his teammates as they clear vision. Once he realizes the next wave is coming in, he can quickly path through here to immediately get back to mid. It's just so efficient to go from the jungle back to pressuring the wave, and Pays is doing exactly the same thing we saw Ruler do a little bit ago. There's nothing Hanwha can do. They have no vision in the jungle, and eventually their mid lane Azeka makes a mistake in bot lane and gets caught out by Sejuani, who was lurking in the jungle. Since that was such a quick sequence, let's rewatch that from Hanwha's point of view real quick. Do you see how impossible it feels for them to play right now? They can't walk up in mid or bot lane to contest the push. Zeri can't even enter her own jungle to take the wolves because the brush next to it is controlled too heavily by Gen G. This is what we want you to take away from here. If you can take control of this part of the jungle when you have a lead, you will absolutely suffocate your opponents. You'll guarantee that you get the objectives you're playing for, or you'll eventually tilt your opponents into making a mistake you can capitalize on. So, paying attention in future competitive games you watch, you'll notice that a lot more fights are happening exactly in this area. The defending team will be desperate to try to hold their ground here. Most teams are realizing that if you lose control of this brush in your blue side jungle, that you will slowly bleed out anyway. As a result, teams are fighting to the death over this area way more often. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap on this video. Make sure to tune into MSI as it's going to be super fun to watch all the regions clash on the new map. The tournament will begin on May 1st and continue through the 19th. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you again next time. See ya!